Greetings, YouTube. One of the things that I believe has been consistent through all the editions of Gamma World, I never looked at the one that was put out for the 4E edition of D&D, is there's always been a genetic line of humans known as pure strain or genetically pure humans. So they were humans that had been tinkered with prior to the apocalypse, and they had no mutations. In fact, they could pretty much not mutate. If they were exposed to mutagens and radiation, they could be sickened and they could die, but they would not mutate. So I started thinking about how you would arrive at that position. And I think I came around to this from the whole genetic conservatism of the Star Trek universe, because they're really anti-transhumanism, which is horrible. I'm a major transhumanist. And there's one Dr. Bashir in one of the series. It's discovered that he has actually been genetically modified to be nearly perfect physically and mentally and whatever, yada yada yada. You get it. But it was a horrible thing that his parents did by making him not a crippled, sickly child and turning him into, just shy of Captain America. But I don't have a problem with that. Star Trek does, but I don't. But that got me thinking about how would you arrive at an entire population of people who had their genes tinkered with so that they were better, but they were also more narrow, in the sense that they were immune to future manipulation. They had been genetically engineered so that it would be very difficult to change that gene line at a future date, whether intentionally or through happenstance, exposure to mutagens and radiation and things like that. So the first thing I thought of would be the really socially conservative folks. The folks that think that genetic manipulation is wrong, it's evil, you're going against God's will. And they actually get themselves kind of turned around to the point where they come to realize, well, God has given us this technology for us to make sure that our future children will remain pure. Now that kind of cognitive dissonance is not hard to see in the real world amongst social conservatives. So these folks are like, we're gonna make sure that these folks our children are perfectly and utterly and absolutely pure, so that they cannot change themselves in the future intentionally. An offshoot of that form of social conservatism could also be racial. My race, whether it's the plaid people or what have you, is the best race, so we should then create a pure strain of us so that we will always exist and no one can ever change us. So you also have that strain going on there. But then you might also have people on the left, politically, who are concerned almost in an environmental protect nature kind of stance, where they're afraid that if you do not preserve some core of human purity, not along racist lines, not along socially conservative, God told us to do this thing, but that we have to preserve this the same way you want to make sure that polar bears continue to exist and elephants continue to exist, and you get the idea. So they come up with a similar concept to create a core of people who are never going to change in the future. And also in there you could have people who are a little more passive and not racist, but like the Amish and the Mennonites, they might do it the same way. Now, here's the interesting thought. If these gene lines, these lines are created, are these lines cross-compatible? So if you've got a bunch of people over here who've created, on the left, who've created these, genetically pure but genetically diverse group of people who are pure strain and will always be pure strain, can that group breed with the Aryans? or breed, say, with some Hindus who've decided that they really need to make sure that the Hindu traditions not only are preserved culturally but are preserved genetically so that people in the future look like us. Can those groups interbreed, or are they restricted? Which would explain in many ways why in almost every version of Gamma World, at least everyone I've ever read, the pure strain humans are one of the smallest populations. Particularly because sometimes they find themselves into relationships with ghost mutants, people that can pass as pure strain human. Marvel mutants, or a lot of Marvel mutants are like that. They just look like ordinary everyday people. And in fact, they may not even be aware that they are mutants. For example, they could have a superhuman immunity disease. No one's going to really be concerned about the fact that Bob is just a really healthy guy, or he's got a slightly faster healing rate. If it's low enough, no one's really going to question that. Or maybe he's a mechanical genius, because there was a like military genius and scientific genius. I think there was two different versions of that in the 4th edition Game of World, and the earlier editions, I think, as well, that gave them a big advantage when it came to either combat or into being inventors and figuring out artifacts and things like that. So if somebody's just really good, then maybe you think of them as a Stephen Hawking's. And you're not questioning the fact that they are, in fact, a mutant. But they would not be able to breed with a pure strain person because they are of different gene lines. So are all the different types of pure strain humans that survive past the apocalyptic event, whatever your apocalyptic event is, can they interbreed with each other, or are they completely isolated, not just necessarily geographically, but when they finally do meet up, are they, isolated because of genetics? They have become distinct species that cannot interbreed. Not even producing mules. It just doesn't happen. And in the event that a ghost mutant doesn't find themselves in a relationship with one of these people and they cannot have offspring, you might just chalk that up to the fact that the world in the post-apocalyptic universe is just harsh and difficult, and sometimes people are just sterile. And there may even be people in the future who are unaware that they have come from a strain of pure strain humans. They just know that in their community they have successful offspring, and when they tend to mix up with other communities, they don't. So they tend to stay with their own community. Which also leads to the possibility, would inbreeding be more of a risk amongst pure strain humans? Now, I know, if my recollection is correct, most of the pure strain humans had some kind of a boost to their constitution because they had been genetically engineered to be better at fighting disease and better at healing and just more robust. So they have that in their favor, at least. But would inbreeding eventually, even though you have these genetic traits that may have either eliminated or suppressed some of the nastier immediate effects of inbreeding, would they still eventually show their ugly head if the groups became small enough and isolated enough and they interbred too deeply? So you're not going to get mutants per se, but could you just get generation after generation that is becoming less and less fit, less and less capable of producing offspring? So let's talk about science fiction genetics in the post-apocalyptic world. What kind of pure strain humans have you used? And I'll be honest, when I was running a Gamma World campaign, or the number of different Gamma World type campaigns I've run over the years, I never thought about those things that deeply. I just kind of thought, okay, you want to play a pure strain human? That's your thing. New mutant, new humans over here, mutant animals there. It didn't get into quite the depth I'm discussing here. This is very much bordering on a philosophical discussion using post-apocalyptic genetics as a springboard. But it's something that's been kind of kicking around in my skull, so I thought I'd bring it up here, and maybe you folks can add some insight. So let's talk about post-apocalyptic genetics among folks that at least think they're pure strain humans.